Password sharing will begin in the coming months, the firm says. The plan means members who want to share accounts with people outside of the household will face an extra fee. The move, aimed at boosting subscribers, has been trialled in some countries, but not yet rolled out in the UK or US. It comes as the company announced it would shut down the DVD rental service that launched the firm 25 years ago. Netflix has been on the hunt for ways to reignite growth, which has slowed sharply as competition heats up, households grapple with rising costs, and it reaches what analysts see as saturation point in some of its biggest markets. It shed more than 1 million subscribers in the first 6 months of 2022. Though it more than made up for those losses later in the year, helped by subscribers gained in Asia, the decline jolted the firm to make changes. The company introduced a less expensive streaming option with advertisements last year and cut prices in 116 countries in the 3 months to March in an effort to entice more people to sign up for its service. It had also been preparing for a wide expansion of its paid sharing program, which it started trialling in some countries last year, adding more in February. In a letter to investors on Tuesday, Netflix said it would introduce paid sharing widely, including in the US, by July, a few months later than expected, as it tweaks the offering in response to feedback, like making sure users can access their accounts easily while traveling. The company declined to confirm when UK users should expect to see changes, but noted that the vast majority of its markets would be included in the next phase of the rollout. We're pleased with the most recent launches, the company said in the letter. We learn more with each rollout, and we've incorporated the latest learnings, which we think will lead to even better results. Netflix has estimated that more than 100 million households share passwords in breach of its official rules, an audience it hopes to tap to drive revenue growth. In Canada, adding a sub-account costs an extra $7.99 Canadian dollars a month on top of the standard or premium monthly membership cost. Paid sharing costs €3.99 in Portugal and €5.99 in Spain. The company warned investors to expect some cancellations as it expands the program, but said longer-term paid sharing will ensure a bigger revenue base from which we can grow as we improve our service. In Canada, where the changes were introduced in February, its paid membership base is now larger than it was before the changes, and revenue growth has accelerated. California-based Netflix has come a long way since it started shipping DVDs to customers in the US in 1998. It launched its streaming service in 2007 and is now a global behemoth with more than 232 million subscribers around the world. In the investor letter, Netflix described the DVD service, which was shut down in September, as the booster rocket that got streaming to a leading position. We feel so privileged to have been able to share movie nights with our DVD members for so long. So proud of what our employees achieved and excited to continue pleasing entertainment fans for many more decades to come, the company said. But despite its early lead, Netflix's dominance of the streaming industry has started to erode as competition has intensified. The company added just 1.75 million paid memberships in the January to March period. It also forecast weak growth in the months ahead than many analysts had expected. Paolo Pescatore, analyst at PP Foresight, called the performance mixed. The quarter rises more questions than answers. Netflix said overall revenue was up 3.7% year-on-year to $8.1 billion. It reported $1.3 billion in profit, down from nearly $1.6 billion last year. Paul Werner, principal analyst at Insider Intelligence, said the results showed Netflix's paid password sharing program and ads business had hit early speed bumps, and even in the best case scenario, will take a long time to scale up. These are worrying signs for a business that, despite still being a market leader, is struggling to get its mojo back. An overhaul of the overdraft system in the UK has collectively saved borrowers £1 billion, the city regulator says, but some people are still missing out on support. Banks were told to set up their own single overdraft rate by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, 2 years ago to simplify the options for borrowers. Costs rose for some, but fell for those who previously went overdrawn without permission. The less complex system made fees easier to compare, the FCA said. Overdrafts are intended for short-term or emergency use, the regulator said, with other types of credit more suitable for long-term borrowing. These savings came from reforms in 2019 and 2020, which tackled overdraft pricing and provided support for customers who used overdrafts repeatedly. The policy was designed to help the 14 million people who suffered most because they slipped into unarranged overdrafts without getting authorization in advance from the bank and paid much higher charges. The FCA's evaluation of its own new rules found each customer who had an arranged overdraft or access to an unarranged overdraft saved on average £17.40 in charges in 2021 due to the new pricing rules. The action we took to simplify overdraft charges and to tackle high unarranged overdraft fees has saved people across the UK almost £1 billion in total, said Sheldon Mills from the FCA. Such savings are vital as people manage cost of living pressures. In terms of how you tackle it together, how to deal with looming debt, you need to talk to someone. You are not alone and there is help available. A trained debt advisor can talk you through the options. You need to take control. Citizens advice suggests you work out how much you owe, who to, which debts are the most urgent, and how much you need to pay each month. You need to ask for a payment plan. Energy suppliers, for example, must give you a chance to clear your debt before taking any action to recover the money. You need to check you're getting the right money. Use the independent money help website or benefits calculators run by Policy and Practice and charities Entitled to and Turn to Us, and ask for breathing space. If you're receiving debt advice in England and Wales, you can apply for a break to shield you from further interest and charges for up to 60 days. The measures were questioned by some borrowers and campaigners at the time. Some of the 19 million people who used arranged overdrafts were unhappy at the rise in their rates. But the FCA decided charges were too high and too confusing, so it banned treating people with unarranged overdrafts differently, and it banned daily or monthly charges. Lenders had made £2.4 billion in revenue from overdrafts in 2017, around a third of which was from unarranged overdraft fees and charges before the changes were made. Although money has been saved and the use of overdrafts fell sharply during the pandemic, they remain a relatively expensive borrowing option with annual interest rates of up to around 40%. The FCA also reviewed that gaps were found in how some lenders monitor and review the effectiveness of their policies and procedures for customers who repeatedly use their overdraft. That meant some people were missing out on the support they should be receiving because lenders failed to spot their potential difficulties. The business lobby group, the CBI, is in turmoil as allegations of sexual misconduct have been made against some of its employees. But what counts as sexual harassment, and what should you do if you encounter it at work? Sexual harassment is unwanted behaviour of a sexual nature, says Alison Loveday, an employment lawyer and business consultant at Lockett Loveday McMahon Solicitors in Manchester. It must have either violated someone's dignity, whether it was intended or not, or created an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for them, whether it was intended or not. It can be a one-off act or a pattern of behaviour, but it doesn't have to be repeated, she says. According to the workplace experts ACAS, examples include flirting, gesturing, or making sexual remarks about somebody's body, clothing, or appearance, asking questions about someone's sex life, telling sexually offensive jokes, making sexual comments, or jokes about someone's sexual orientation or gender reassignment, displaying or sharing pornographic or sexual images or other sexual content, touching someone against their will, for example, hugging them, sexual assault or rape. In the workplace, it covers employees and workers, contractors and self-employed people, as well as job applicants. What counts as a workplace? The workplace in this context isn't just the office. If an event or situation is in any way connected with work, then it can fall under the workplace, and there could be a claim brought for sexual harassment. That could be a Christmas party, a client event, or messaging between colleagues. What are your rights? If you have been subjected to sexual harassment, you can submit a grievance to your HR department and have the right to have that complaint thoroughly investigated, regardless of the seniority of the individuals involved. says the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, CIPD. Some companies allow for anonymous reporting of complaints or have digitized systems. While allowing anonymity may encourage people to come forward, the CIPD's head of public policy, Ben Wilmot, says these types of investigations pose a challenge for HR departments, as they cannot operate in a vacuum if organizational leaders are failing to reflect company values or expected standards of behavior. What should companies do when someone makes a complaint? An employer must investigate any report made to them of sexual harassment, even if there has been a long time between the incident taking place and it being reported. The employer should still take it very seriously, says ACAS. Moreover, Ms. Loveday says more companies are trying to put policies and procedures in place that control behaviour to a certain extent, for example, codes of conduct and policies covering behaviour at workplace events. But policies themselves are not sufficient, says Mr. Wilmot. Regular training for anyone responsible for people management is essential. What about social media? The law around sexual harassment is based on the Equality Act 2010, when social media was in its infancy, said Mr. Wilmot, and it is a challenge for employers. It depends on specifics. However, employers do need to have clear policies. People do have the right to privacy, but also not to bring an organisation into disrepute. Alison Loveday adds, with social media messaging, there's not a legal prohibition, but it's a really good example of where we haven't caught up with changing risk. What can you do if you're accused of sexual harassment? If you feel you have been wrongly accused, it's important to be able to gather evidence, look at the allegations, and see if you are able to challenge them. A log of events, transcripts of conversations, witnesses to your interactions are all important. Employers should not presume the accusation is either true or false, says ACAS. Someone who is accused of sexual harassment should be offered support and sensitivity, so the handling of the complaint is balanced. Michelle Last, employment partner at Keystone Law, says businesses can take disciplinary actions against a complainant up to and including dismissal. There could also be grounds for defamation, but the reality is that substantial legal costs associated with taking it to court generally puts people off. What about workplace relationships? Regardless of whether it is consensual, quite a few companies now have rules around workplace relationships. Either they don't allow them, or if you are in one, you have to declare it. Often it's when the relationship has broken up that has resulted in claims or third-party claims. Fox News has settled a defamation lawsuit from the voting machine company Dominion over its reporting of the 2020 presidential election. In a last-minute settlement before trial, the network agreed to pay £634 million, about half of the $1.6 billion initially sought by Dominion. Dominion argued its business was harmed by Fox spreading false claims the vote had been rigged against Donald Trump. The deal spares Fox executives such as Rupert Murdoch from having to testify. The judge in the case is not required to give his approval for the agreement. Fox said Tuesday's settlement is one of the most anticipated defamation trials in recent US history, reflected its commitment to the highest journalistic standards. The Fox statement added, without elaborating, that the network acknowledges the court's rulings, finding certain claims about Dominion to be false. Dominion Chief Executive John Powless told a press conference, "The deal included Fox admitting to telling lies, causing enormous damage to my company." Justin Nelson, a Dominion attorney, told reporters that the truth matters. Lies have consequences, he added. Over 2 years ago, a torrent of lies swept Dominion and election officials across America into an alternative universe of conspiracy theories, causing grievous harm to Dominion and the country. Mr. Nelson added that for democracy to endure, Americans must share a commitment to facts. Opening arguments in the case have been due to start on Tuesday afternoon. The announcement of a settlement came after an unexplained delay of several hours once jury selection had finished, prompting speculations that talks were underway behind the scenes. On Monday, Delaware Superior Court Judge Eric Davis announced that the start of the trial would be delayed by 24 hours. Although he gave no reason, US media reported that it was to give both sides an opportunity to settlement. On Tuesday morning, however, both sides appeared to be digging in for a lengthy trial. Attorneys for Fox had repeatedly objected to the $1.6 billion in damages sought by Colorado-based Dominion, characterizing the figure as massively inflated. The real cost of the case, Fox had argued, would be the cherished rights to freedom of speech and of the press enshrined in the First Amendment of the US Constitution. Dominion's lawsuit argued that the conservative network had sullied the electronic voting company's reputation by airing falsehoods about the 2020 vote being stolen from former President Trump. Mr. Trump attacked the voting machine company after the ballot falsely claimed that it rigged the election to favor winner Joe Biden. The lawsuit said that the false claims were partly an effort to win over viewers who were angered by Fox's decision on election night to correctly declare that Mr. Trump's then challenger Joe Biden had won the crucial state of Arizona. Two of the Fox executives responsible for the Arizona decision lost their jobs 2 months later. Legal findings released ahead of the trial suggested that a number of Fox executives and journalists privately questioned and dismissed conspiracy claims that the 2020 presidential election was stolen, but still put them on air. Court documents showed that Mr. Murdoch referred to the claims about Dominion as really crazy, but failed to take any action. In one series of text messages, top-rated host Tucker Carlson said some of the claims were insane. Another host, Sean Hannity, said privately he did not believe them for 1 second. Fox has said the words were taken out of context. Ahead of the trial, Judge Davis ruled that the claims against Dominion had already been proven false, emphasizing that the falsehoods were crystal clear. Despite the mammoth payout, some legal experts believe the settlement was overall a positive outcome for the network. Syracuse University professor and First Amendment expert Roy Gutman said, looking down the line at a 6-week trial, this was going to be grueling for everyone involved and likely embarrassing for Fox. But a verdict against Fox could have been even costlier and had serious implications on subsequent rulings on the actual malice standard and the First Amendment itself. Had the defamation trial gone ahead, jurors would have been asked with determining whether Fox News acted with actual malice by broadcasting claims it knew to be false. Civil litigation attorney Michelle Simpson-Tugale told the BBC that the settlement speaks to the massive threat Fox saw from this litigation. The reputational harm of having executives, including Chairman Rupert Murdoch and host Take the Stand, seems to have moved the parties towards a resolution, Ms. Tugale added. Fox still faces a second similar defamation lawsuit from another election technology firm, Smartmatic, which is seeking $2.7 billion. Dominion still has litigation pending against two conservative news networks, OAN and Newsmax. The company has also sued Trump allies such as Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and Mike Lindell. In a last-minute deal, Fox News has settled a defamation lawsuit from voting machine firm Dominion over its coverage of the 2020 US election. The network, controlled by media mogul Rupert Murdoch and his family, agreed to pay Dominion £634 million. While the payout is large, it means Fox avoids what was billed by some as the defamation trial of the century. However, the network faces a second similar lawsuit from another election technology firm, Smartmatic. The settlement means that Fox and Dominion can now put the case behind them, with both firms being able to claim victory. The reality is, two big companies in this case are by nature risk-averse, and any time you've got a jury, it's risky, David Logan, professor of law at Roger Williams University, told the BBC. At almost $800 million, it is one of the biggest ever financial settlements in a defamation case. It's obviously a significant number, and we shouldn't dismiss that. I mean, it is a really, really large number, Angelo Caruso, president of left-leaning media watchdog Media Matters for America, told the BBC. However, it is less than half of the $1.6 billion initially sought by Dominion. To put the payout into context, parent company Fox Corporation reported a net income of $1.23 billion for the last financial year. It is also sitting on large reserves of cash, around $4 billion, according to recent company filings. Rupert Murdoch and his family, who control the News Corp media empire, which includes Fox News, the Times of London and the Wall Street Journal, are estimated to have a fortune of $17.6 billion, according to Forbes magazine. The deal also spares Fox executives, including Mr. Murdoch and some of the network's anchors, from having to testify in one of the most high-profile defamation trials in history. Fox was going to have to deal with another round of embarrassing revelations, Professor Logan said. The company's legal team may have also been weighing the potential financial cost if the case had gone ahead and Dominion had won. Fox issued a written statement acknowledging the court's findings that Fox made false claims about Dominion, but it did not include an apology. We are hopeful that our decision to resolve this dispute with Dominion amicably instead of the acrimony of a divisive trial allows the country to move forward from these issues, the statement said. However, Fox will not be able to put the issues of its reporting on the 2020 presidential election behind it quite yet. It still faces a second similar defamation lawsuit from another election technology firm, Smartmatic, which is seeking $2.7 billion. For Dominion, the $787.5 million per Fox payout may just be the start. It still has outstanding cases against Fox's smaller rivals Newsmax and OAN, plus several of former President Trump's associates. Thousands of flights have been delayed in the United States after Southwest Airlines was forced to temporarily ground all flights because of a technical glitch. The airline said it would work to accommodate passengers disrupted by the 1-hour nationwide stoppage. FlightAware says over 5,400 flights were delayed into or out of the US on Tuesday. More than 100 were cancelled. It's the latest setback for the budget airline. This morning, Southwest Airlines experienced a technical issue with one of their internal systems, the FAA said. It added that all departures had been paused at the airline's request while the Dallas-based carrier addressed the issue. The pause has been lifted and their service has resumed, the FAA said. On social media, representatives for the airline asked passengers to message them directly for assistance and sought to reassure passengers that the company was working to resolve the issue. Southwest Airlines has been under fire after staff shortages during the Christmas holiday season led to 16,700 flight cancellations and disrupted travel plans for 2 million customers. At the time, the US Department of Transportation said it would investigate whether customers were subject to unfair and deceptive practices. Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Conservatives of losing control of court services and letting violent criminals go free because of record backlogs. The Labour leader said the Tories had taken a wrecking ball to the criminal justice system. But Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said Sir Keir was soft on criminals. He added that his party had toughened up sentencing powers so criminals spent longer in prison. During Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir attacked Mr Sunak personally for the state of the criminal justice system. Can't the Prime Minister see because they have lost control of the court service, because they have created the largest court backlog on record, he's letting violent criminals go free, the Labour leader asked. Crown courts in England and Wales ended last year with a backlog of 61,737 cases, the highest year-end figure on record, although down from a peak in the autumn. But Mr Sunak hit back, accusing Sir Keir of watering down punishments when he sat on the Sentencing Council, which issues guidelines to courts, in his previous role as Director of Public Prosecutions. That's why they call him Sir Softly, soft on crime, soft on criminals, he added. Sir Keir also highlighted the case of a convicted people smuggler who threw boiling water over a prison officer in 2019, leaving him with first-degree burns. The individual was not jailed for the attack, as he was given a suspended sentence. The Labour leader referenced a court judgment from last month, which cited the fact it took 16 months for the attacker to be charged and 2 years for him to be sentenced, as well as prison overcrowding as among the reasons for the decision. Sir Keir described the circumstances of the case as completely unacceptable, adding anyone watching this would wonder why someone who violently attacks a key worker isn't behind bars. Mr Sunak responded by criticising Labour for voting against the Sentencing Act last year, which ended automatic early release for the most serious violent offenders halfway through their sentence. It comes after Labour put out a number of adverts on Twitter last week attacking Mr Sunak's record on crime. One advert, which claimed that the Prime Minister did not think adults convicted of child sex assaults should go to prison, attracted controversy and was criticised by opposition parties and some Labour figures. Labour has sought to make crime a focus of its campaigning ahead of May's local elections in England. The Liberal Democrats have also accused the government of letting criminals get away with crimes and are calling for a legal right for burglary victims to be visited by a police officer. Woolpit in Suffolk has an intriguing legend. It tells of two children found near the village in the 12th century. The big twist, they were both green. Now modern day, Woolpit is part of a political battle that could see the district council, Mid-Suffolk, turn a similar hue. The largely rural district with some traditional chocolate box villages and a heavy reliance on cars for transport and oil to heat homes might not seem the most obvious place for the Green Party to target and win over. In elections in 2019, though, they more than doubled their seats on the council from 5 to 12, and the Conservatives lost their majority. The Greens are now confident they can overtake the Conservatives to become the biggest party and perhaps even make history by winning an outright majority on a council for the first time in May's local elections. The Greens would need to win another 6 seats to win a majority. The Conservatives could take back control if they win too. One issue which appears to be benefiting the Greens politically is large-scale housing development because of concerns that the rural environment would be damaged. Opposite a carved wooden water pump built to mark Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, near to the old post office and nesting next to a pink half-timbered tea shop, is the Woolpit Institute. In an upstairs room decorated with tapestries depicting the village's evolution, 10 people in their 60s and 70s are politely but competitively playing one another at table tennis. Just down the road from the institute, the diggers and earth movers are out on a patch of land which will eventually add another 300 homes to the village. In between dodging stray ping pong balls, resident Paul Proctor and club founder Linda Moore say large-scale house building is a worry. Paul says, "I think with the sheer volume of building and the number of people that would be moving into the area, probably the main concern is about facilities. Can they cope?" Linda worries about losing what she describes as the wonderful community life of the village and thinks it will just mean more people commuting out. They haven't done anything about the road, which they need to. They haven't enlarged our school. Where are all the children going to go, and what about jobs? There are no jobs in Woolpit. She also voices concerns about losing agricultural land to solar farms. Suffolk has become something of a centre for energy infrastructure. So what else might be fueling the Greens' hopes for a win in Mid-Suffolk in particular? It's difficult to pin down one precise reason. In small villages, word gets around, and at least some of their success seems to have been built on simply being visibly active in their local communities. They've had a presence on the council for 20 years and had gained a few more councillors at each subsequent election before 2019's overnight boost. This year, the Greens and the Conservatives are the only options on the ballot paper in more than a third of the seats up for election in Mid-Suffolk, including Woolpit. That may help explain some of the confidence from the Greens, who often struggle to gain ground under the first-past-the-post system. The Lib Dems, Labour and Reform are standing candidates in some wards, including in Stowmarket, the district's biggest town. Among the handful of stalls in the centre of Stowmarket's Thursday market is one selling zero-waste products. It's just one sign of a generally heightened awareness of environmental issues, which may help the Greens. There's evidence too of disillusion with politics as usual. In a pedestrian precinct backing onto a large supermarket in Zaki's shoe repair shop and key cutters. Its owner, Paul Zykros, has been on the site for 9 years, and he says the running of the business at the moment is a bit up and down. "I'm coming into work every day wondering whether you're going to get the people through the door. Looking outside and seeing the footfall in this town just disappear completely is just very scary. I think the country's in a mess, but I would like someone who could come into this town and start to look at what they can do." He, along with other traders, wants to see parking made free to encourage in more people. Helena, out walking her terrier Herbert, says the town centre is the worst it's been for empty shops in the almost 30 years she's lived in Stowmarket. It just seems to be a shame that there doesn't seem to be enough local business in the high street to support the existing businesses that are here. If it was a tiny little town where people were just moving out, I could understand it, but it's not. She acknowledges that it is the same in a lot of towns. That's why the outcome of this election could be significant. The Greens often argue that some of the problems they face is that people don't vote for them because in some places they just don't think they can get elected. If they can win here, it is likely to give them more credibility as contenders in other areas of traditionally conservative rural England. Recent visible successes have often come for them in cities such as Brighton Hove, which they currently run as a minority administration, and where Labour is pushing hard to take control. If they lose ground in Suffolk this time, though, they could miss out on their best chance to take a council in many years. With so many specific local issues in play, what a win could mean for their chances in a general election is much harder to predict. Russia-aligned hackers are seeking to disrupt or destroy Britain's critical infrastructure, a Cabinet Office minister has warned. The groups have started to focus on the UK in recent months, Oliver Dowden said in a speech on Wednesday. The UK is not doing enough to protect its infrastructure from cyber threats, the head of the National Cyber Security Centre, NCSC, warned. The NCSC also issued an official threat alert to critical businesses. While addressing the Cyber UK conference in Belfast on Wednesday, Lindy Cameron, the CEO of the NCSC, said the UK needs to have resilience to all threats, whether they come from nation-states or cyber criminals. She went on to tell the audience, if the UK is to be the safest place to live and work online, then resilience must urgently move to the top of our investment shopping list. Officials are recommending that organisations such as those behind the UK's energy and water supplies act now to protect themselves against the emerging cyber threat. The NCSC, which is part of UK Cyber and Intelligence Agency GCHQ, says the hacking groups, which are often sympathetic to Russia's invasion in Ukraine, are ideologically motivated. The alert warned the groups are less predictable because they are not subject to formal state control. Some have stated a desire to achieve a more disruptive and destructive impact against Western critical national infrastructure, including in the UK, the NCSC said. We expect these groups to look for opportunities to create such an impact, particularly if systems are poorly protected. Speaking at the conference, Mr. Dowden described the hackers as Wagner-like, a reference to the Russian mercenaries fighting in Ukraine. Disclosing this threat is not something we do lightly, but we believe it is necessary if we want these companies to understand the current risks they face and take action to defend themselves and the country. Mr. Dowden said the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster announced plans to set cyber resilience targets for critical sectors to meet within 2 years and to bring private sector businesses working on critical infrastructure into the scope of resilience regulations. These are the companies in charge of keeping our country running, of keeping the lights on. Our shared prosperity depends on them taking their own security seriously. Ms Cameron warned it is important the UK's critical national infrastructure is protected from hackers and also to make sure people are ready for the threats they could face in the future. She said there had been some intent in recent months to try to target such UK infrastructure, adding what we are still seeing is quite low-level activity, but it is really important that our critical national infrastructure is well protected and resilient. Speaking on Radio 4's Today programme, she said, what we've seen in the last year is really significant cyber activity in Ukraine as a result of Russia's conflict, so we want to make sure people are prepared for the consequences of these groups taking an interest in more widely than Ukraine. When asked about whether she has seen attempts to target the UK, she said, we're seeing some indication of that, but I wouldn't want to go into further details. A UK-wide emergency alert system announced by the government is due to be tested on Sunday the 23rd of April. A message will appear on the home screens of mobile phones and tablets from 3 p.m, accompanied by a loud siren-like sound or vibration lasting for about 10 seconds. The minister in charge of the system, Oliver Dowden, said the new system was a vital tool to keep the public safe in life-threatening emergencies. What will the message say? The test alert will say, this is a test of emergency alerts, a new UK government service that will warn you if there's a life-threatening emergency nearby. In a real emergency, follow the instructions in the alert to keep yourself and others safe. Visit gov.uk/alerts for more information. This is a test. You do not need to take any action. The test had originally been planned for the early evening, but was moved to avoid clashing with an FA Cup semi-final. which kicks off at Wembley Stadium at 4:30 p.m. Phone users can swipe away the alert messages or click OK on their home screen to continue using their phone as normal. Which devices will receive the alerts? The alerts will work on all 4G and 5G phone networks in the UK and on devices with the following software: iPhones running iOS 14.5 or later, phones and tablets running Android 11 or later. There is no need to register or download an application, but older non-smartphones will be unable to receive the alerts, and nor will devices that are turned off or on aeroplane mode. The alert will sound on phones on silent mode. The government has said the emergency services will have other ways to notify those without a compatible device. The alerts will not replace local news, radio or social media. Can users turn off emergency alerts? Despite the government strongly recommending enabling devices to receive alerts, users can opt out by searching their settings for emergency alerts and turning off severe alerts and extreme alerts. Is personal data protected? Personal data about a user's device or specific location will not be collected or shared, according to the Cabinet Office. The alerts will be broadcast from mobile phone masts to every compatible phone and tablet within range. The government or emergency services do not need to know the mobile phone number or any other personal data. Why have some organisations criticised the test? Domestic abuse campaigners, including the charity Refuge, warn the test could endanger some vulnerable people by potentially alerting an abuser to the location of a hidden phone. The government said it had been engaging with the organisations to ensure vulnerable people were not adversely affected. Refuge has produced a video showing how to turn off the alerts. Drivers are also advised not to look at or touch their phone until it is safe to do so, just as when receiving calls or messages. When might emergency alerts be used in the future? Emergency alerts with advice about how to stay safe will be sent locally or nationally by the government or emergency services on rare occasions where there is a threat to life. They will initially focus on the most serious weather-related events such as severe flooding, fires, extreme weather, but many people will not receive an alert for months, perhaps even years. Do other countries use emergency alerts? Many countries around the world use emergency alert systems, including the United States, the Netherlands, and Japan. Japan credits its system with saving countless lives in natural disasters. The US system allows the president to send a message to citizens directly, but it does not always go to plan. In 2018, in the United States, the state of Hawaii, an alert warning of an incoming missile was sent in error, causing widespread panic. Scotland's controversial deposit return scheme will now not launch until March of next year, the country's First Minister has announced. This scheme, which is aimed at increasing the number of single-use drinks, bottles and cans that are recycled, was due to start in August, but it has faced fierce opposition from many small breweries and distillers. Hamza Yusuf announced a delay as he set out his priorities for his government over the next 3 years. Mr Yusuf also confirmed that proposals to restrict alcohol advertising will be sent back to the drawing board as part of his efforts to reset the government's relationship with business, and a 6-month trial will see peak rail fares scrapped across the ScotRail network from October. His statement was largely overshadowed by the arrest of the SNP's treasurer Colin Beattie on Tuesday morning by police officers who are investigating the party's finances. The deposit return scheme will see 20p added to the price of a single-use drinks container, which will be refunded to people who return the container to retailer or hospitality premises that offer single-use products. Some retailers will accept returns over the counter, while larger stores, shopping centres and community hubs will operate automated receiving points known as reverse vending machines, RVMs. Many small businesses fear it will place extra costs and other burdens on them at a time when they are already struggling, and there have been concerns that thousands of firms could end up being forced out the Scottish market and that many products will disappear from the shelves. The scheme will also require Westminster to grant an exception to the UK-wide Internal Market Act, given possible implications elsewhere in the UK. Mr Yusuf said he remained committed to the deposit return scheme as a way to increase recycling, reduce litter and help achieve our net zero ambitions. He added, "We recognise the uncertainty that continues to be created as a result of the UK government delaying the decision to exclude the scheme from the Internal Market Act. We had hoped for that decision this week, but it has not yet come. The First Minister also said that he and Circular Economy Minister Lorna Slater, the Scottish Green co-leader who has been driving the introduction of the scheme, had heard the concerns of business over its readiness for launch in August. He said, as a result, we will now delay the launch of the scheme to the 1st of March 2024. This provides 10 months for business to get ready. We will use that additional time to work with businesses and Circularity Scotland to address concerns with the scheme and ensure a successful launch next year. A package of measures, Mr Youssef said, would also be put in place to simplify and de-risk the scheme. Ms Slater will give further details on the new package and timetable for the scheme later this week. The announcement came just minutes after former SNP Minister Fergus Ewing described the scheme as a green poll tax. The Scotch Whisky Association welcomed the delay, but stressed that it supported the principles of the deposit return scheme. But it said that the plan in its current form would hamper the efforts of businesses across the country to reduce waste and bring about a more circular economy. The Nighttime Industries Association said the scheme continued to be fundamentally flawed and completely unworkable for large parts of our sector, and that a total redesign was needed. The Federation of Small Businesses in Scotland welcomed the decision, but called for the government to engage in meaningful conversation to address business concerns. Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack also welcomed the pause and said the two governments now had an opportunity to continue working together on solutions. Mr Youssef also acknowledged that proposals to restrict alcohol advertising, including a ban on sponsorships for sports and live events, and ending the sales of products with drinks firms' logos on, had caused real concern to the industry. He said, I have therefore instructed my officials to take these ideas back to the drawing board and to work with the industry and with public health stakeholders to agree a new set of proposals. I believe that all of us want to reduce the harm caused by alcohol, particularly but to young people, but without undermining Scotland's world-class drinks industry or tourism sector. The First Minister said he hoped that a way forward could be found which achieves both of those aims. He also confirmed that the legislation process, another of his predecessor Nicola Sturgeon's key but controversial policies, the creation of a new national care service, would take slightly more time to help build consensus on how it should operate. And he said Scotland would be rejoining it to international education league tables that it left in the wake of the country's schools' failings in the rankings. Mr Youssef had hoped his speech would allow him to set out what he was billing as a fresh start for Scotland after a tumultuous 3 weeks since he succeeded Miss Sturgeon as First Minister and SNP leader. He pledged his government would be centred on the principles of equality, opportunity and community, and suggested tax increases could be on the way for higher earners, as he spoke of the need to be bolder on taxation. Scottish Conservative MSP Maurice Golden responded to the delay, saying it would come as huge relief to businesses and consumers. He added, ministers urgently need to get back to the drawing board and come up with something that is radically better than what's been proposed so far. Their first port of call should be inviting Scottish business leaders to advise how best to move forward. There was a degree of inevitability that the First Minister would announce a delay to the rollout of Scotland's deposit return scheme. The policy became a political football during the SNP leadership contest, with all three candidates promising varying degrees of change. Businesses have repeatedly raised concerns about how it will be administered, with some suggesting smaller firms will be hit hardest. But the tone of the announcement was interesting. The delay isn't because of those expressed business concerns, Hamza Youssef said, but because the UK government has failed so far to grant the legislation an exemption from the Internal Markets Act. This week we learned ministers were anticipating a decision on the exemption from UK government counterparts. The Scottish Greens are not happy, and remember, they are in government with the SNP in Scotland. In fact, it's one of their ministers who is responsible for this policy. They say that climate action is being held hostage by the Tory government at Westminster and lay the blame squarely with them. Mr Youssef admitted to journalists earlier on Tuesday that Mr Beattie's arrest was a very serious matter indeed, and that timing was not ideal in terms of his statement to Parliament. Mr Beattie's arrest came 2 weeks after former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell, who is married to Nicola Sturgeon, was also arrested before later being released without charge pending further investigation. Officers spent 2 days searching Mr Murrell and Miss Sturgeon's home in Glasgow and also searched the SNP's headquarters in Edinburgh. Police Scotland launched its Operation Branchform investigation into the SNP's finances in July 2021 after receiving complaints about how more than £660,000 of donations for a second independence referendum campaign were used. US pop star Aaron Carter accidentally drowned in his bathtub because of drugs he had taken, a coroner's report says. Carter, 34, the younger brother of the Backstreet Boys' Nick Carter, was found dead at his home in Lancaster, California on the 5th of November. The autopsy has now revealed that his death was caused by drowning due to the effects of sedatives he had taken and gas he had inhaled. Alprazolam, often sold under the brand name Xanax, was found in his system. The compressed gas difluoroethane was also detected. The report describes it as a gas commonly used as a propellant in air spray cleaners, which can induce feelings of euphoria when inhaled. Carter was last seen alive when police visited his home in the early hours of the 4th of November, the Associated Press reports. They were checking on him after he had been seen with an inhalant on an Instagram live video, according to a police report included in the autopsy findings. Carter had asked the officers to leave. Later that day, he missed an appointment with a drug counsellor, the police report said. The following day, a woman described as a housekeeper visited Carter's home to offer him coffee. When there was no response, she let herself in and found him lying unresponsive in a jacuzzi-style tub with the jet still running. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Prescription bottles and cans of an electronic duster that he had used for inhaling were found by investigators. Carter started his career opening for the boy band Backstreet Boys on a number of tours and concerts. During the late 90s and early noughties, he sold millions of copies of his 4 albums, the first of which came out when he was only 9 years old. His second album, Aaron's Party, Come Get It, was released in 2000 and went triple platinum. Following the album, he supported Britney Spears on the Oops, I Did It Again tour. As he grew older, Carter transitioned into rap and also appeared in Broadway musicals and on the US TV show Dancing with the Stars. He faced a number of struggles, checking into rehab several times and filing a bankruptcy petition in 2013 over millions of dollars of debt, much of it tax-related. He also had several run-ins with authorities over drugs possessions and reckless driving. Carter's son Prince was born in 2021, and according to The Hollywood Reporter, he checked into rehab last year in a bid to gain custody of him. Many paid tribute to Carter after his death, including Paris Hilton, Tyler Hilton and Hilary Duff, and bands New Kids on the Block and NSYNC. In 2023, there are more podcasts out there than ever before, from comedy to news, sport to true crime. But despite continued levels of financial growth in the industry, the production of new podcasts has faltered. Of the total number of shows globally, less than a quarter have more than 10 episodes. Has the era of the have-a-go podcasters come to an end? Anyone can make a podcast. It can be free, fun, and if successful, a lucrative and career-changing endeavour. A survey carried out by YouGov suggests that podcasts present one of the biggest growth opportunities for UK media in 2023, with global revenue in the music, radio and podcast market projected to reach $108.3 billion or £87.09 billion before the end of the year. But how does a podcast remain successful? In the music industry, the Sophomore Slump or second album syndrome is a dreaded jinx that every artist must face if their first album is a success, but this ideology has now entered the ever-growing world of podcasting. There are currently around 3 to 4 million podcasts internationally, but just over half of those have more than 3 episodes, with only 720,000 podcasts comprising more than 10 episodes. The trend has led to a growth in second series syndrome, where, like new albums from bands in the music industry, shows either halt or fail to make an impact before fully maturing. Mark Popkiewicz, CEO of Aura Studios, an independent studio and podcast network, believes this decline in production beyond 3 episodes is down to commitment from creators. He says despite uptake in listenership, production of new podcasts is down since the pandemic because many have-a-go podcasters created shows but have since lost appetite to keep going. Hannah Maguire and Saruthi Bala are 2 award-winning presenters who broke past the barriers and have now made careers from podcasting, recording their weekly true crime show Red Handed and travelling the world on live tours. The presenters first met at a house party in London, where they discovered a mutual love for all things true crime and decided to create their own podcast, exploring disturbing and mysterious cases. The show now boasts 200,000 average weekly true crime listeners and in 2022 won the Listener's Choice Prize at the British Podcast Awards for the second year in a row. The pair have hosted the podcast for the last 6 years and are launching their first limited series with Novel and Global on the 19th of April, titled Filthy Ritual, with the hopes of broadening their audience even further. They say, in their opinion, the secret to building and maintaining a successful podcast, particularly in true crime, lies in presenting something new and meaty to their audience. Bala says, our audience is so receptive and so open to whatever we might want to try, so we've started to do more of these bigger cases that are politically, culturally or socially driven. I think our audience has come along on that journey with us. Red Handed covers a wide range of stories, from serial killers to hauntings and even more topical political murders, in an attempt to present an alternative view to what is reported. Last year we did the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, Balal says. We've only ever heard that story told from a political angle. While we obviously covered the politics of it, telling it from a true crime thinker's brain made it take on a different narrative when we told that story. Again, we attracted new people to the podcast by doing that. I think it's, in terms of a limited series, you need something that's really meaty with a lot of people and a lot of moving parts. Rather than the single episodic format of Red Handed, Filthy Ritual takes a different, more investigative approach across 6 episodes, looking at the story of Juliet D'Souza in a jaw-dropping tale of one of the most prolific fraudsters in British history. Maguire says she and Bala are really excited about the exposure this new venture with 2 production companies will bring, and believes it's going to attract a completely different audience. It is the drive and commitment from Maguire and Bala that has led to the continued success of their podcast. On Filthy Ritual, Bala says, we worked on it for a very, very long time. I think when we originally agreed to do it, we did not think that it would be as much work as it ended up being. We were always told, you guys don't have to come to do this interview, we can do the interview. Hannah and I said that's not the kind of show we want to be involved in. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it 100%. For other topical podcasts such as the BBC's Newscast, the research is more instant, with the discussion points coming to the production team in the constant form of daily news stories. But a lot of popular podcasts must find success in reaching corners of society that aren't normally reachable, while still feeling relatable. That Peter Crouch podcast made national news when the team recorded an episode with Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, in Kensington Palace, where they discussed his love of Aston Villa, ate curry and drank beers. If top podcasts by listening figures are any indication, a recognisable name and personality-driven content is a key contributing factor to success or failure. A 2021 Nielsen report found that some of the most popular podcast genres include music, true crime, news and comedy. When looking at the top international podcasts in each of those genres, shows like Armchair Expert, TED Talks Daily and The Joe Rogan Experience all lead their field. All of those shows in some form boast a host whose personality carries the whole show and acts as a driver for the direction of each episode, something that Pop Keyswick says has been a terrifically important part of the early podcast phenomenon, and in itself will remain so. But in his opinion, it is not enough to sustain long-term viability of any given show. With the growth in finances, ad revenue and popularity, Pop Keyswick says the emphasis on behind-the-scenes activity, such as research and production, is becoming ever more important. Having evergreen material and imparting new information to audiences is a growing component of what drives long-term growth. The era of banter podcasts, where it's all about the chat, is slowly waning. There must be more value offered to the audience for listeners to keep on wanting it to come back and not drop one show for another. Other award-winning podcasts find success by bringing new conversations and powerful discussions to the mainstream. In March 2023, the multi-award-winning podcast You, Me and the Big C released its final episode, 5 years to the day after its first. The topical podcast, originally hosted by Rachel Bland, who died in 2018, Lauren Mahone and Dame Deborah James, who died last year, discussed life with treatment of and other topics relating to the disease cancer. But despite a decline in podcast longevity, listening figures are still on the rise. According to a study conducted by Vodafone, the coronavirus pandemic was influential in causing a rise in the consumption of podcasts in the UK, with as many as 42% of respondents saying they listen to podcasts more now than ever before. Pop Keyswick believes that the number of podcasts in circulation is still just a drop in the ocean, but adds that the form of podcasting will have to evolve to maximise reach. He says everything has a ceiling, The economy, world population, you name it. Nothing is infinite, but there is much room to grow. Maguire and Bellal believe the same can be said for true crime. I think it really speaks to the public appetite for it that most true crime shows are grassroots shows that people just started, Maguire says. The hunger for the content was out there, but media production houses weren't making it. There's really no limit on what we can do. Despite the pain, I continue my fight. The world is on fire, but you should act. A crowd of 600 crammed into a nightclub in Lviv danced along to the defiant words of Tiborchi, the Nigerian-Ukrainian pop duo set to represent Ukraine at Eurovision 2023, which is taking place in Liverpool. They are performing their song Heart of Steel live at the club before the nightly wartime security curfew kicks in at midnight. Frontman Jeffrey immerses the crowd in his performance, interacting with them in English and Ukrainian, while Andriy complements his soulful vocals with a booming electronic sound from the DJ decks. Backstage, the pair tell us Russia's invasion is always at the back of their minds when they take to the stage. The responsibility of defending Ukraine's crown landed on Andriy and Jeffrey's shoulders when they won the public vote on the country's Eurovision selection show last year. The pair describe Heart of Steel, which Andrei wrote as Ukrainian defenders were besieged inside the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol last year, as a song of strength, confidence and responsibility. They do not exactly lack stage presence when performing it. It's about strong people who keep a good attitude in a negative situation, explains Andrei. For us, it is important that our country can win against the occupiers who came to our land, and if we win Eurovision, we would appreciate that too. As you watch Jeffrey invite some fans on stage, you wonder about the home advantage Ukraine is missing out on this year. Ukraine's success in 2022, with Kalush orchestras winning song Stefania, could have been a chance for the country to host the competition for the third time. But because of Russia's continued assault on the country, Eurovision organisers have moved this year's events to Liverpool. No harm done, says a philosophical Jeffrey. We know the reasons and we appreciate the UK for hosting on our behalf. Tiborchi admit getting ready for Eurovision has been challenging at times. Their rehearsals and outfit fittings would sometimes be interrupted by air raid sirens. We go to shelters but then carry on, like all Ukrainians, says Andrei. Some of the audience have an appetite for Ukraine to be seen as more than a country at war with Russia. In the crowd we bump into Kryl, who thinks the country needs to make something new. Last year it was all about the war, now we have to show people that Ukraine is more than this. We are a culture, it's about our language and our society. The story of Tiborchi begins in nearby Turnip Hill in 2016. Jeffrey, who had travelled to Ukraine from Nigeria 3 years before, moved to picturesque Lake City to study pharmacy. Andriy had signed up to the same course, and when he saw Jeffrey walk past him in the street, he stopped him as he wanted to find someone with whom he could practice his English. Jeffrey describes how he was taken aback by the question as he walks us down the road, but he agreed as he did not have any friends with whom to practice Ukrainian. I said, all right, and the next day we went out for a beer. It started on this street. A chain of events which would lead the duo to music's biggest stage. Since 2018, they have released 4 studio albums and even tried their luck at the Eurovision national selection a few years ago. The pair attract a few stares as they stroll through their old stomping ground, but it seems not everyone here will be glued to their screens in May. I'm not following Eurovision this year, says an unimpressed Maria, who we meet in the town. The news in Ukraine is more important now. I'll watch after we win the war, when I'm in a better mood. Elsewhere, Jeffrey is unsure whether even his parents will be tuning in on the night. Back in Nigeria, no one watches Eurovision, he explains. They hadn't even heard of the competition when we were selected. I had to tell them all about it. They're happy for us though. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion last year, Jeffrey decided to stay in Ukraine, mainly because of his music with Andrei. Now it's the pair's music which is making them leave the country for Liverpool. The duo say they will return, ideally with a glass Eurovision trophy in their luggage. A new museum will open in East London next year, exploring the life of William Shakespeare. The Museum of Shakespeare will be a permanent interactive experience within the archaeological remains of the Curtain Playhouse, Shoreditch. It will focus on the culture of London in the 16th century and the life and inspirations of the famous playwright. This will be Shakespeare as you have never experienced it before, said Harry Parr, co-founder of the project. The Curtain Playhouse was a cultural and social centre in London during Shakespeare's life and housed performances of Henry V and Romeo and Juliet. An archaeological excavation of the site between 2011 and 2016 revealed its remains, which will be made publicly accessible for the first time in the museum. The Museum of Shakespeare was designed by creative studio Bombas and Parr in collaboration with Museum of London Archaeology, MoLA and Historic England. It is part of a 2.3-acre or 1-hectare development site with 412 apartments and offices and shops led by Kane International. Mr. Parr of Bombas and Parr said he wanted London to be a city unrivaled in its cultural importance and reputation for world-class entertainment. Visitors to the Museum of Shakespeare will also be able to soak up the sights, smells, sounds and people who inspired the playwright through a series of interactive displays and workshops, including a projected reconstruction of the playhouse, the creators said. Dr. Callan Davies of the University of Roehampton and author of What is a Playhouse said, "It's fantastic that Elizabethan London's longest-lived playhouse, which has so many stories to tell about creativity and opportunity, can adapt once more to show more how performance worked, why it mattered and why it still does today." The museum is set to open in spring 2024. The body that manages criminal records in the UK is still facing disruption nearly a month after a cyber attack. The ACRO Criminal Records Office provides records to police, exchanges them internationally, and processes certificates for people wishing to work with children or gain immigration visas. It took its website and application portal offline when the hack was detected on the 21st of March. Staff have been increased to deal with all email applications, but delays persist. We are working with the relevant authorities, including the National Cyber Security Centre, to investigate and remediate the incident, an official said. There was no conclusive evidence personal data had been compromised, but investigations were ongoing. On Twitter, customers said they were facing long delays, with many resorting to contacting the ACRO Twitter account in the hope of securing their certificates. John Gilday in Scotland told BBC News he had finally received his so he could apply for a visa to work in Brazil. After 3 weeks of waiting, though, his friend had received his much faster. Rahim Abdel Ilah in Leicester, however, who asked that his surname be withheld, told BBC News he was still waiting for his certificate so he could get married in Morocco, and had no idea how long it would take, as it was now impossible to check the status of his application. It's pretty frustrating and annoying that the police are taking so long to recover from a cyber attack, he said. In January, a ransomware attack led to weeks of disruption and delays to services at Royal Mail. Hackers thought to be based in Russia reportedly demanded nearly $70 million or £56 million to return computer services to normal, but Royal Mail refused. A suspected ransomware attack by a separate gang with links to Russian cyber criminal networks hit another big company, Capita, on the 31st of March. Capita holds many public service contracts, including providing the National Telecommunications Network for smart meters, the Pension Regulators Employee Auto-Enrollment Scheme for the Gas Certification Scheme. A Capita official told BBC News, "We continue to work closely with specialist advisors and forensic experts in investigating the incident. We are in constant contact with all relevant regulators and authorities. Our investigations have not yet been able to confirm any evidence of customer, supplier or colleague data having been compromised. Once our investigations have concluded, we will, if necessary, inform any impacted parties. We have taken all appropriate steps to ensure the robustness of our systems and are confident in our ability to meet our service delivery commitments. Capita says most client services remained in operation, but has not issued an update on its website since the 3rd of April, and a criminal gang is advertising private information thought to have been stolen in the hack. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre describes ransomware as a Tier 1 national security threat, with attacks continuing to increase in scale and complexity. Ambitious targets to halt the decline in nature may already be slipping out of reach, a study suggests. Scientists say the effects of climate change and habitat loss on animal populations has been underestimated. They say bringing back wildlife may take longer than expected, and that unless we act now, global diversity targets will be out of reach. In December, almost 200 countries agreed to halt the decline in nature by the end of the decade. They set ambitious goals to halt the loss of biodiversity and protect 30% of land and seas by 2030. What this analysis is highlighting is that it's even harder than we think to meet the targets, said Dr. Robin Freeman of ZSL's Institute of Zoology in London. We need to act more urgently and more quickly and tackle more things to achieve them. The study, published in the Royal Society journal Proceedings B, analysed trends in populations of more than 600 different species of birds and mammals. These scientists found that past modelling work had largely ignored time lags of decades before the effects of drivers such as climate change and habitat loss kick in. This means we may be further down the line towards biodiversity loss than we thought. We've seen delayed effects of up to 40 years for large mammals and birds, Dr. Freeman told BBC News. And that means that the longer we wait to take action, the longer it will take to see any kind of response. On the plus side, the research suggests immediate action on such things as unsustainable hunting and over-exploitation of natural resources will have immediate and far-ranging benefits. More plants and animals are going extinct than at any other point in human history. In December, countries signed up to a landmark agreement setting global goals to address biodiversity loss. A total of 188 governments, including the UK, committed to global targets for 2030, from reducing global food waste by half to phasing out subsidies that harm biodiversity. In his best-selling 2020 novel, The Ministry for the Future, science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson opens with a deadly heatwave in India which kills millions of people. The sky blazes like an atomic bomb. The heat from it is a slap in the face. The eyes sting, and everything was tan and beige and a brilliant, unbearable white. Water doesn't help because it is hot as Bath. Worse than the air. People die faster than ever. Mr. Robinson's dystopian tale about global heating might be a horror fantasy of sorts, but it's also a chilling warning. Earlier this week, 12 people died from heatstroke and many others were admitted to hospital after attending a government-sponsored event in an open ground under a blazing sun in Navi Mumbai in India's Maharashtra state. India is one of the countries most exposed and vulnerable to heat. Hot days and hot night events have risen significantly and are projected to increase between 2- and 4-fold by 2050. Heat waves are also predicted to arrive earlier, stay longer and become more frequent. The Weather Office has predicted above average temperatures and heat waves until the end of May. Average temperatures in India have risen by about 0.7% between 1901 and 2018, partly due to climate change. Heat waves killed more than 22,000 people between 1992 and 2015, according to official figures. Experts reckon the actual toll would be much greater, yet the country really hasn't understood the importance of heat and how heat can kill, says Dilip Malvalanka, director of the Gujarat-based Indian Institute of Public Health. This is partly because we don't compile our mortality data properly. Professor Malvalanka should know, in May 2010, he found that the city of Ahmedabad had recorded 800 all-cause excess deaths, a measure of how many more people are dying than expected compared to the previous few years. during a sweltering week of record-breaking temperatures. It was clear, he said, that heat was killing a lot of people. He said researchers compared the total number of deaths in the city to the maximum temperature recorded on the day, and laid down 3 colour-coded alerts, with the red warning triggering above 45 centigrade. Prodded by these findings, Professor Mavalanka helped put together India's first heat action plan for the city of Ahmedabad. The plan kicked off in 2013 and advocated simple solutions like staying indoors, drinking lots of water, before stepping out and going to the hospital emergency if one felt sick. By 2018, he says deaths from all causes had declined by 1/3 in the hot, dry city. But the bad news is India's heat action plans doesn't seem to be working very well. It is unclear whether the authorities in Navi Mumbai had a heat action plan in place when 1 million people reportedly were allowed to gather under the open sky. A new study of 37 heat action plans at the city, district and state levels by Aditya Velathan Pillai and Tamanna Dalal of Centre for Policy Research, a think tank, found a lot of shortcomings. For one, most of the plans were not built for local context and have an oversimplified view of the hazards. Only 10 of the 37 plans studied seem to establish locally defined temperature thresholds, although it is unclear whether they took factors like humidity into account while declaring a heat wave. We recommend nuancing and localizing the heat hazard definition by including climate projections, Mr. Pillay told them. One way to do it is to have more automated weather stations at village levels, according to Professor Mavalanka. Second, the researchers found that nearly all the plans were poor at identifying and targeting vulnerable groups, farm and construction workers, who toll in the open, pregnant women, the elderly and children were most vulnerable to heat. Some 3/4 of India's workers work in heat-exposed jobs like construction and mining. Workers are losing the ability to safely and efficiently work outside as the planet warms. It's becoming too hot and humid for them to cool themselves enough when they generate a large amount of body heat when conducting heavy labour, says climate researcher Luke Parsons of Duke University, North Carolina. This becomes worse during heat waves as there are fewer safe and productive work hours during the day, he adds. Mr. Pillay says that India needs granular understanding of which neighbourhoods have most people working in jobs where they are exposed to heat and whether they could afford to buy a cooler or afford to skip work, he adds. You might have a situation where 3% of the area of the city contained 80% of the vulnerable population. Also, most of the heat action plans seem to be underfunded, had weak legal foundations with scant accountability, and were not sufficiently transparent, Mr. Pillay and Mr. Dalal found. Heatwave solutions can often be simple, planting enough trees in extremely exposed and hot areas or using design choices to reduce heat gain and increase heat loss in buildings. Sometimes simple surveillance solutions such as moving patients from a baking top floor to a lower floor of a non-air conditioned hospital can protect lives, as a study in Ahmedabad found. Having work protections in place to stop or slow work if it is too hot can help so people don't feel the need to keep working at high intensity when it's not safe, says Mr. Parsons. India saw a 55% rise in deaths due to extreme heat between 2000 and 2004 and 2017 and 2024. A recent study published in the medical journal The Lancet found. Exposure to heat also caused a loss of 167.2 billion potential labour hours among Indians in 2021, resulting in loss of incomes equivalent to about 5.4% of the country's GDP. But clearly Indians are still not taking heat seriously enough. According to reports, the place in Navi Mumbai, where the government ceremony had taken place, had recorded a maximum temperature of 38 centigrade or 100 Fahrenheit on Sunday. Yet photos of the event showed thousands sitting directly under the sun with no roof or covering to offer shelter. Only a few carried umbrellas or wrapped towels on their heads. I live in Delhi where the temperatures can touch 50 centigrade and I see very few people even bring out their umbrellas, Mr. Pillay said. A skeleton of a 67 million year old Tyrannosaurus rex has been sold to a private individual for 5.55 million Swiss francs or £5 million. This is the first time a T-Rex has been auctioned in Europe. The specimen has been described as one of the most spectacular T-Rex skeletons in existence, measuring 11.6 meters long and 3.9 meters tall. Scientists are concerned about the increasing number of dinosaur fossils ending up in private collections. It's not the first auction of T-Rex or the highest price fetched, but such sales are relatively rare. Last year, a T-Rex skeleton, which was expected to fetch up to £21 million at auction, was withdrawn after doubts were raised over where parts of it had come from. The name of this skeleton is 293 Trinity because it is built from 3 different T-Rexes from US dinosaur sites in Montana and Wyoming. It is made up of 293 separate bones from specimens retrieved between 2008 and 2013. Most auctioned dinosaur skeletons are made up partly of casts or replacements, but more than half of 293 Trinities is real bone, a relatively high percentage. It was sold at the Koller auction house in Zurich. In an interview for the firm's website, Dr. Hans Jacob Silber of the Athol Dinosaur Museum in Switzerland described Trinity as a special beast. There are only 20 or 30 good T-Rex skeletons in the world, and this is one of the bigger and better ones, he said. The dinosaur was brought by a private individual and will remain in Europe, according to a spokesperson for the auction house. Koller hopes it will go on public display, but it is not clear at this stage what the owner's plans are. Professor Steve Brusate, a dinosaur expert at Edinburgh University, told the BBC News that he was concerned that increasing numbers of dinosaur specimens were finding their way into private hands. Most museums can't compete with the deep pockets of the oligarchs and the super rich. What worries me is that these very rare dinosaur skeletons, which are scientifically very valuable and are important for education and public engagement, disappear into the vaults of private collectors, which means that they are not available for public display. But Dr. Dennis Hansen of the Zoological Museum in Zurich said that he believed that many privately owned dinosaur specimens eventually end up being available to the public. I see it in the same way as art. Art historians would like every single important painting to be available in the public realm. But experience shows that sooner or later it ends up in the public domain.